Rome prided itself on its legions, the most disciplined and feared military force of the ancient world. But what if I told you that warriors deemed undisciplined not only confronted but also destabilized this war machine? How could something so unlikely have been possible? The Romans believed their flawless organization and tactical formations were unbreakable. Yet, during their expansion, they encountered adversaries who fought in ways that seemed chaotic and unpredictable, at least to Roman eyes. These so-called undisciplined warriors didn't follow rules, but instead used creativity, speed, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain to turn the tide against the Romans. Imagine standing on the battlefield, certain of your victory, only to be caught off guard by an attack coming from every direction. The formation meant to protect you is useless against enemies who know the terrain better than anyone else. Chaos ensues, fear sets in, and suddenly, you realize you're not facing brute force, but intelligence and adaptability, something your legion wasn't prepared to combat. In today's video, you'll uncover how these seemingly disorganized warriors challenged the Roman legions, dismantling their reputation for invincibility. We'll delve into their innovative tactics, the fatal mistakes of Roman generals, and the moments of tension that made Rome question its power. And the most incredible part? These lessons in warfare are still studied today. Get ready to learn how a lack of discipline, combined with creativity and boldness, didn't just overcome brute force, but also left behind eternal lessons on strategy and adaptation. From unexpected ambushes to offensives in impossible terrains, we'll break down every element that pushed Rome to its limits. If you want to dive into epic stories that showcase the challenges and defeats that shaped Rome, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create fascinating content and spread these stories that deserve to be told. The Roman legions were built on the foundation of discipline, precision, and order, qualities that had given them an unparalleled reputation in warfare. Their formations were like moving walls of steel, designed to outlast and overpower any enemy. But what if these very strengths became their undoing? When the legions marched into the dense, shadowy forests of Teutoburg, they encountered an environment hostile to their tactics. The narrow paths and dense canopy turned their perfect lines into tangled crowds. Their enemies, tribes considered barbarians by Roman standards, used the forest as their ally, striking from unseen angles and retreating just as quickly. This wasn't merely chaos, it was calculated disruption. The Roman soldiers, trained to rely on their shields and comrades in tight ranks, found their formations useless. The cries of ambush and panic filled the air as arrows rained down from unseen sources, and warriors armed with intimate knowledge of the terrain dismantled their order. The forest was not just a battlefield. It became a trap that mocked Roman rigidity. The legions, accustomed to facing enemies head-on, were now being picked apart by an enemy that refused to follow the rules of traditional combat. This shocking defeat wasn't an isolated incident, but a harbinger of things to come. The Romans would face other adversaries who didn't view war as a chessboard, but as an opportunity for creativity. From the swift riders of the steppes to the desert warriors of North Africa, unpredictability became the greatest weapon against the empire's famed order. The question is, how could such seemingly disorganized tactics dismantle one of history's most disciplined armies? Was this chaos truly random, or was there an unseen strategy at play? The answer lies not in disorder, but in the brilliance behind unconventional warfare, a lesson that even Rome had to learn the hard way. What seemed like disorganized skirmishes to the Romans were, in reality, masterclasses in strategy. Take, for example, the tactics of Viriathus, a leader who turned Iberian guerrilla warfare into an art form. His forces didn't march in formation or rely on heavy armor like the Romans. Instead, they relied on mobility, surprise, and intimate knowledge of the rugged Spanish terrain. Every ambush was a carefully crafted symphony of misdirection and precision, leaving Roman generals frustrated and humiliated. The contradiction was striking. Rome relied on brute strength and the predictability of its formations, while their adversaries thrived on the unexpected. The so-called undisciplined warriors exploited the rigidity of the legions, forcing them into situations where their tactics were not only ineffective, but outright detrimental. Ambushes from behind, sudden retreats into the shadows, and relentless night raids disrupted the Roman rhythm. These guerrilla fighters, who seemed to have no formal training, displayed an ingenuity that far surpassed traditional strategies. To make matters worse, Roman pride often blinded them to the lessons these defeats offered. Generals clung to the belief that superior training and equipment would prevail, even as they repeatedly fell victim to the same tactics. It wasn't until they began adapting their approach, learning from their enemies, that they started to counteract these strategies. However, these adaptations came at a cost, as the empire's traditional methods had to be rethought. But why were these unconventional methods so successful, even when the Romans adapted? Was it the terrain, the element of surprise, or something deeper? Perhaps the key wasn't just in what these warriors did, but in how they thought, a question that shifts the focus to the psychological side of warfare. The terrain often acted as an unspoken participant in battles against Rome, turning landscapes into weapons of war. The Dacians, for instance, turned the Carpathian Mountains into fortresses, forcing Roman soldiers into grueling uphill battles. In North Africa, the sandy deserts became obstacles that rendered Roman logistics almost useless. These environments tested the empire's ability to adapt in ways that its structured approach simply couldn't handle. This invisible battlefield was more than just physical, it was psychological. The enemies of Rome were fighting on home turf, using every inch of familiar land to their advantage. While the Romans relied on maps and scouts, their opponents moved with instinctive precision. Rivers became choke points, forests became mazes, and deserts became traps. Each step forward for the Romans became a gamble, as every tree, hill, or dune concealed the potential for an ambush. The psychological toll on Roman soldiers was immense. Imagine marching for weeks, only to find yourself surrounded by enemies who seemed to vanish into thin air after each attack. Morale would crumble as fear spread through the ranks, making disciplined soldiers hesitant and vulnerable. Roman generals, so used to controlling the battlefield, found themselves at the mercy of forces they couldn't predict or overpower. This leads to a critical question. If terrain and psychological warfare were so effective, how could Rome counter these strategies? Did they embrace chaos? Or did they find a way to turn it against their enemies? The answers lie in Rome's eventual adaptations, but not without considerable cost. The defeats Rome suffered at the hands of undisciplined warriors didn't just bruise their pride. They reshaped their approach to warfare. Over time, the Romans began to incorporate guerrilla tactics into their own strategies. They recruited local auxiliaries, men who understood the terrain and could fight in ways the traditional legions could not. Cavalry units became more mobile, supply lines more flexible, and formations more adaptable. These adaptations came with a bitter truth. Rome's invincibility had been shattered. They could no longer rely solely on their famed discipline and formations. The inclusion of local fighters wasn't just a practical adjustment. It was an acknowledgement that chaos, when wielded strategically, could rival the might of any organized army. Yet even with these changes, the legacy of Rome's defeats remained. Guerrilla warfare had proven that smaller forces, with enough ingenuity, could challenge the largest empires. The echoes of these lessons are still felt today. From the American Revolution to modern insurgencies, the principles of using creativity, speed, and terrain to outmaneuver larger forces have become cornerstones of military strategy. Rome's experience serves as both a warning and a guide, demonstrating the power of adaptability in the face of rigid strength. But as we reflect on these shifts in strategy, one question remains. Does true strength lie in discipline, or in the ability to break the rules when the situation demands it? And if chaos can topple an empire, what does that mean for the future of warfare itself? If guerrilla warfare could shake the mighty Roman legions, what does that say about the future of battle? Is true power found in strict discipline, or in the ability to break the rules when necessary? To see the other side of the coin, when discipline and unbreakable loyalty led to an impossible victory. Watch the story of Caesar's legendary 10th Legion at Alesia. How did they defy the odds and secure one of the greatest triumphs in Roman history? Click now to uncover the secrets of Rome's most unstoppable warriors.